It's time to make it, just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to this episode of You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell, the old fat guy. I'm so glad you came around today because we're going to make one of my favorite breakfasts, biscuits and sausage gravy. It is a great breakfast to make when you have company over because you can make lots of it up and it doesn't take long to make it all and it tastes absolutely delicious. We're going to start by making our biscuits. Now the trick of making biscuits is to manipulate them as little as possible or they'll get tough and to use really cold fat in it. Now I'm going to be using butter and I like to layer some grated butter into my biscuits because I think it gives them a better texture. So I have 40 milliliters of butter that I've kept in the freezer and it's frozen really hard. And I'm just going to grate it through a cheese grater because I want it in pieces. Now, it'll tend to crumble, don't worry about that. You can use the crumbled pieces, but you just want it broken up into little pieces. Just like that. And any big pieces, just break them up with your fingers, and then this is going to go into the freezer to stay really cold till I need it again. In this bowl, I have 650 milliliters, or about 2 2/3 cups of all-purpose flour. And to it, I'm going to add 18 milliliters, which is 1 tablespoon plus a half a teaspoon of baking powder, and 4 milliliters, or 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And I'm just going to throw them into my flour. And I'm just going to stir them together so that they're well mixed. Now I'm going to add the main fat for my biscuits, which is 75 milliliters of cold butter out of the fridge. And I'm just going to put that into the flour, and I'm going to use something called a pastry blender to cut the butter into the flour. And this, you'll see, is a little bit of work at first because the butter's cold. But you've just got to keep pushing it through, keep turning the pastry blender, until it's the consistency of a coarse cornmeal. That'll just take a couple of minutes. Every once in a while you have to stop and push the butter off of the pastry blender. You can do this by rubbing it between your fingers, but it takes a lot longer. And if you look at it, you'll see that there's a few little chunks of butter in there. That's no problem, that's what you want. Once you've got the fat cut into the flour, now you have to add your liquid ingredients. And what I have here is 7/8 of a cup, or about 225 milliliters of milk, and 15 milliliters of white vinegar. I'm just going to put the vinegar in the milk, which will make it sour and give it a little bit of a tart taste, which is very desirable in biscuits. And just stir it around a bit. And then I'm just going to dump that all at once into my flour. And if you remember what I said was you don't want to manipulate it too much. So we're just going to mix this just until it starts to stick together. You don't want it to be a homogeneous mixture. You just want the flour to be moistened. It shouldn't take more than 8 to 10 turnings of the flour and the liquid. There you go, just see how it starts to come together. We're just going to flour the surface that I'm working on here, with just a little bit of extra flour. It just stops it from sticking a bit. And we're going to turn this whole mixture onto that floured surface. And you'll see how it's all raggedy and not really sticking together. Believe it or not, that's exactly how you want it. Now you just want to take it and form it into a square that is about twice as long as it is high. Now I'm going to go back and get that frozen butter I put in the fridge. And I'm going to put a quarter of the butter, just spread it over the top of the center part of that rectangle. And I'm going to bring the edges in, fold them in, and press them flat. Then I'm going to turn it a quarter turn, squeeze it out to a square that's twice as wide as it is tall, and put a second quarter on it. Do it again, press the centers in, turn it a quarter turn, and put the third quarter of the butter on it. Fold it in and turn it a quarter turn and put the last of the butter on top of the dough. Fold it into the middle. And if your hands start to stick a bit like that is, just give them a bit more flour. Just start to press it out. And then you want to press it out into a long rectangle that's about 3/4 of an inch thick, because that's the thickness you want your biscuits to be when they go in the oven. You know, you'll note some little chunks of butter in there. That's actually a good thing. And I'm just going to get my tray and bring it over. This is the cookie sheet I'll be cooking on. Note that it isn't greased. You do not need to grease the cookie sheet with biscuits because there's so much butter in them. And I'm just going to cut out some biscuits with a cookie cutter. It's also known as a biscuit cutter. You can use a glass or something, but this is just easier. And you just cut them out and put them on the tray. Now with the cuttings that are left over, you can cut more biscuits out of them, but they won't be as light as the first ones because you've worked them more. And like I said, that makes for a not as tender biscuit. So we'll just form them up. And you'll be able to pick them out because they won't look as pretty. And I'll just do this last little bit in a separate tray, but I'm going to put this tray in the oven at 450 degrees for 12 to 14 minutes. While the biscuits are cooling, we're going to make our sausage gravy. I've preheated a fry pan to medium-high heat, and I'm just going to add some butter because I find some butter gives the gravy a little extra taste. So I'm putting 15 milliliters or a tablespoon of butter in, and we're just going to let it melt. Once you've got the pan coated while it's melting, you can start breaking your sausage into it. Now what I have here is 275 grams of bulk breakfast sausage. Now this I made myself, but you can also buy the chubs in the supermarket, or you can buy regular little sausages in a link and squeeze them out of the skin, as long as it's seasoned sausage meat and not just ground pork. And you just want to break it up and throw it in pieces into your fry pan. And we're just going to cook that around and break it up with your spatula while it's cooking. You want it into smaller pieces you can get, but don't worry about a few large chunks. And just cook it till it's cooked through and there's no uncooked parts in the center. This will take a few minutes. As you can see, the pork is cooked through now and there's no pink parts left. So we're ready to add our seasonings. Now for our seasonings, we have 1 milliliter or a quarter of a teaspoon of sage, 1 milliliter or a quarter teaspoon of dried thyme, 1 milliliter or a quarter teaspoon of dried rosemary, and 1/4 teaspoon of ground pepper. So just sprinkle those over the sausage, and we're going to cook them for 30 seconds to a minute longer because it just makes the flavor come out of the seasonings if you apply a bit of heat to them. And we'll just stir those around. Oh, you can smell the seasonings come off it. It is so good. When you can smell them really strongly like that, then you're ready to add some flour. And what I have for the flour is 65 milliliters, or 1/4 of a cup plus 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour that I'm just going to sprinkle over the sausage. And just stir it around to coat the sausage. Once you've got the flour all covered over the sausage, what I'm going to do is add 625 milliliters, which is 2.5 cups of milk. And just pour that over your sausage. And you just want to keep stirring this until it comes to a boil. What'll happen is the flour will start to cook out and it'll start to tighten the milk up so that it thickens. If you do this in anything other than a non-stick pan, the flour will want to stick to the bottom before you add the milk. That's no problem. Just make sure you scrape it all up because it's got a lot of flavor in it. You'll see that it's just come to a boil. And you just want to keep letting it boil until it gets a nice thickness to it like a good gravy. That should just take a few seconds after the boil starts. And as you can see, that's got a nice gravy consistency to it. And the good news is your sausage gravy is done. Our sausage gravy is made. The biscuits have had a chance to sit and cool for the length of time it took to make the sausage gravy. I'm just going to put them on my plate here so they're ready to serve nicely. Now, the thing with biscuits is a lot of people tell you you have to tear them open so you get a rough edge. I think it's a bit of a myth, but we'll stick with the tradition. And you'll see how they're nice and light and flaky because we put that butter in there. And we're just going to put a bit of sausage gravy on each of these biscuit halves. And then we do the reason I love to do this show is because I get to try this. I'll just take a cut of this and get a bit of the biscuit and some gravy. The biscuits are crunchy on the outside, flaky and soft and tender on the inside because we didn't overwork the dough. The gravy, the sausage gravy, is creamy. It's got just a touch of pepper taste to it. The sausage gives it a richness and a body that makes it so delicious. You just have to love biscuits and sausage gravy for breakfast, and of course the best part is you can make it.
In this recipe, David made biscuits with sausage gravy. The ingredients used for the biscuits were 650 milliliters of all-purpose flour, 4 milliliters of salt, 18 milliliters of baking powder, 75 milliliters of cold butter, 15 milliliters of vinegar, 225 milliliters of milk, and 40 milliliters of frozen butter. And for the sausage gravy, 15 milliliters of butter, 275 grams of bulk breakfast sausage, 1 milliliter each of sage, thyme, rosemary, and pepper, 65 milliliters of flour, 625 milliliters of milk, and salt and pepper to your taste. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And, as David says, you can make it.
It's time to make it, just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of You Can Make It. There's something that you need in your repertoire if you're going to be cooking, and that's a good, simple cookie. So what I'm going to show you how to do today is a sugar cookie. The advantage of this recipe is it is so easy that if you have children, grandchildren, nieces or nephews, and you want to cook with them, this is the perfect recipe for them because it's very easy, little hands can do it, and it makes a good cookie. You want to have a good result if you're going to start cooking with children. So all you have to do to start making sugar cookies is mix the dry ingredients together first. So what I have here is 300 milliliters or 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. And I'm just going to put that in a bowl. And on this plate, I have 4 milliliters or 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder and 2 milliliters or a half teaspoon of cinnamon. And we're just going to add them to our flour. And we'll mix them together. Now, normally when you make cookies, you have to cream butter. It takes a long time, and kids don't have much patience. This recipe does something a little different. It uses vegetable oil, canola oil or corn oil, instead of butter, so you don't have to cream it. So here I have 90 milliliters, or 1/3 of a cup, plus 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. I'm just going to put that in my stand mixer. You can do this by hand if you want, but for the kids it goes faster. And here I have 125 milliliters or half a cup of just plain sugar. And we're going to add that in there. And we just want to put our stand mixer down and give it a quick mix until it's all blended together. That's all it takes because you don't have to cream the butter. Now, we're going to add to the oil mixture 1 egg. And 2 milliliters or a half a teaspoon of vanilla. Exactly a half a teaspoon. And again, give it a mix until the egg is mixed into the mixture. And that's all it takes. So now we're going to add the dry mixtures to the oil and egg mixture. And we're just going to let it mix up into a nice cookie dough. Just take a couple of minutes on low, a couple of seconds on low actually. Once it starts to come together like this, just shut it down and get a scraper. So I'm just going to get my spatula and give the bowl a scrape to make sure we get all the ingredients in it. Take it off of the batter, off of the paddle here, and just give it a few more seconds to get the last of that little bit of flour mixed in. So now that you've got your dough mixed up, all you have to do is get your cookie sheets out. Now I've preheated my oven to 375 degrees already. And I've got 2 cookie sheets that I've sprayed with baking spray. So we'll just take the dough and put it there ready to work with. And we'll bring my cooking sheet over. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put the cookie dough on the cookie sheets in about the size of a walnut. They will spread out, so you don't need too big a ball. And leave them about 2 inches apart. And again, this is great for kids. They get to roll the ball around. It doesn't have to be perfect balls. And kids like to mess with messy things, so a bit of cookie dough is a good thing. Now, when I was growing up, we'd eat this cookie dough and lick it out of the bowls and that kind of thing. Sadly, you really shouldn't do that anymore. They found that there's salmonella in eggs. And you likely don't want to eat any mixture with raw eggs in it. So, sorry kids, the days of licking the cookie batter are most likely over. There we go. And once you've got 12 on a cookie sheet, you want them to become sugar cookies. And what makes a sugar cookie is it has a little bit of sugar glaze on top of it. And I'm going to show you how to put the sugar glaze on right now. So we'll get our dough out of the way. And I have here a plate with a couple of tablespoons of sugar on it. I'm just going to put it there to make it easier to get to. And I've got a little bit of butter and a normal drinking tumbler. Just rub the butter on the bottom of the tumbler so it gets nice and greasy, and then dip it in the sugar. And then you want to press each cookie down to about 3/8 an inch thick. Don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be exact. Just flatten it out. And again, this is fun for kids to do. You just flatten each one out. And they're now ready to go in the oven. I'm just going to do the other half of my cookie dough on the other cookie sheet now. So I've got both trays of cookies done, and these just have to go in the oven now for 10 to 12 minutes. What you're going to want to watch for is just a little bit of golden around the base of the cookie. They won't get browned on top. You just look for that brown ring around the bottom. Let's put them in a 375 degree Fahrenheit oven. So I checked the cookies after 10 minutes. And they were done. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes longer depending on your oven. Then I let the cookies sit and cool for just a couple of 3 minutes so that nobody's going to burn themselves when they taste it. And then we're just going to put them on a plate so they look pretty. And if you want to know how they're perfect, you look at the underside, and if they're nice and golden like that, your cookies are perfect. Now, our cookies are all done. They're cooled. I love cookies. I'm going to really enjoy this. This reminds me when I used to go to the bake shop and they used to give the kids a free cookie. It's sweet. It's got a touch of cinnamon. The vanilla just gives it a nice flavor. It's got a crunchy texture, but the oil makes it soft on the top. This is a delicious cookie that even kids can make, so you know that you can make it.
In this recipe, David made sugar cookies. The ingredients used were 300 milliliters of flour, 4 milliliters of baking powder, 2 milliliters of cinnamon, 90 milliliters of vegetable oil, 125 milliliters of sugar, 1 egg, 2 milliliters of vanilla, and sugar and butter for pressing the cookies. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And as David says, you can make it.